Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast, where we inspire you to thrive as peculiar people in a modern world. Have you ever wanted a really good example of a believer to represent this movement? Have you ever wanted someone who has made all Christians look good and who also is Torah observant? Well, today's guest is your man. His name is Massey. He is a good Samaritan extraordinaire. And the story that we're going to hear him talk about today is insane because it involves police chases, false arrests, human trafficking of workers. It's like worker human trafficking. The kind that we don't usually hear about. It involves people giving tons of their time and energy and effort to help their fellow man for really no monetary reason, but kind of just to be good Samaritans. We are right in the middle of a Kickstarter fundraiser for something called the Life Network. The Life Network, if it's funded, and it's 80% funded as of right now, will be a Netflix for Torah that will start out with a matchmaking show where Torah observant people are matched up together and they meet and hopefully find true love and get married. There will be a homestead tour show, and we've toured 3 farms or homesteads. One of them was Zach Bauer's. There was also a cattle rancher farm, and there was a permaculture farm. And we'll do more if this thing is funded, to make a whole season of those. And then the last is a ladies' talk show called The Few, and we filmed 3 of those episodes as well, and we'll continue to film that if this is funded. And if it gets funded beyond what we're going for, then we have a whole bunch of other shows. One called Exodus, a family bug out, where it's families go into the wilderness with their bug out bags for 3 days to see if their bug out bags can sustain them, and then they face challenges out there in the wilderness. And then we have a bunch of other shows, and anyone who becomes a member of this Life Network can also vote on future shows that we'll make, whether it's documentaries. We have an idea for a documentary called Shepherds and Serpents, or whether it is a Lego stop motion cartoon, and we have an idea to tell biblical stories through that lens, or a bunch of other things. And we have even more ideas we want to pitch you. We're trying to leverage all the creatives in this movement. So if that sounds interesting to you, then go to watchthelife.com and help make it happen. Without further ado, I give you Mark. Mark, welcome to the Life Podcast. Thank you for taking the time to tell your story today.
Thank you for having me. I'm real excited to share what the Lord has done.
When you reached out to me, you sent me an episode of This American Life, and you were on it, and you were interviewed by Ira Glass, and you were the hero of this episode, I would say, and you made believers look good, and a lot of the other believers in the story made believers look not very good, actually. And so, it's an intriguing story. I wonder if we should start with the story of you and John Pickle and the people that he brought to work for him, if you want to. Or we can start with your early life.
Well, a little bit of my early life, because I feel like that was what fed me to move that direction. I mean, willing to help them.
Yes, let's hear your story. Who are you? Tell us who you are. How'd you become a believer? What happened to you?
In my young life, my mother had got out of church. She wasn't in church for several years. My father would leave and come back. They divorced when I was 4. And my mother worked in the hospital, worked a lot of hours. We stayed at my grandmother's house most of my young life because she was working. And which God began to deal with her when she was home. She began to read us, Bible stories, the children's Bible. And my grandmother was a religious lady, went to church. So we got to go to church, and she nurtured us so much in the Bible. She would pay the grandkids to read the Bible. We'd get $1 a book that we read. So and some of the scripture when you're a young kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you're reading, sometimes we read the children's Bible, but the scriptures that taught, if your hand offendeth thee, cut it off, to a 6, 7-year-old, that sound awful strong. But she paid us to read the Bible. She spent time, we prayed at my grandma's house. So she began to nurture us with prayer. And my mother got in church, she began to go to church. She had divorced, and she kind of held that against herself to serve God again. So I remember her giving a testimony after she did come into church. She couldn't feel the presence of God when she returned to the house of God. But she said one day she just told the Lord, she said, I don't care if you bless me. I don't care if I feel you. I'm going to continue to serve you. And then she got back in church. My mother was growing up in the house after she came to the Lord. She was in the living room late hours praying and reading her Bible. And so we had a lot of nurture and spiritual things in our home. So that kind of began to establish, our spiritual life. And when I was young, we had our church was kind of a broken up church. We had, the preacher just got voted back in 51%. So there was a lot of tension in the church, one side, against the other side. But there was an old praying woman in the church. The Lord gave her, while she was praying, she received a name, and she went to the deacon board. The previous preacher left. He was tired of the tension in the church. So he left, and we didn't have a pastor. So this lady, she said, the Lord told me a Don Reed is to come and pastor our church. And so they didn't know anybody by the name of Don Reed. So they contacted him, or they contacted the denomination. And they said, yes, we do have a Don Reed. And so they called him and told him that we was wanting him to come and preach for us. And he came, but he told us he wasn't interested in our church. He just got voted in 100% in building his wife a house. And so, but when he came, he preached hard, but people were so hungry, they received everything he said. So it wasn't long, and he came to our church, but we're young kids. But he was a different type preacher. He preached that we all have a job to do. We all need to work. If don't just sit there and do nothing. Go plant a tree in the name of the Lord. Do something for the Lord. So his motivation in the church was to have everybody doing something for the Lord, and even the children. We were young. He would come in the altars and pray with the young people, and we had people come into the church that said the reason they come there is they would see the children praying with older people. They would see, they saw the Lord move, and they saw the burden of the people. But our church became a working church. We did bus ministry. We did street ministry. There was Hissom was a place where they took retarded children or children with disability, and we did services there. The projects, but the bus was we began to grow. The Lord began to bless that church, and I was just young, and we'd see mighty things happen because people's heart. We were so the people. I was young, but the people were so tired of being ugly, hateful, and not having, the presence of the Lord in their life. So they were ready to move forward. But we saw such a move of God. The people in our church began to grow, and we had 6 buses. We picked up 300 kids at one point, and we purchased another building just to bring the kids. But he began to establish, even with my family, having that burden for people, and it wasn't just coming to church for me to feel something or to get my, feel good for the week and just go through emotion and sing me some good songs and I feel a few goosebumps, But it was, we've got a purpose, we've got a labor. And so that kind of inbred in us from that movement, that moment in our church. So from that point on, being raised as a young person and taking part in ministries, because everybody's got something to do. Like when you do bus ministry, you got to knock on the door Saturday or they won't be ready Sunday. So it took a lot of work, and kids were able to knock on doors. My brother was 16 driving. I was, 14, but we took part in the ministries in the church and the projects. And so after I grew up and we eventually left that church, the pastor moved on, but that inbred in our life, it stayed there. So me and my mom, we went to my uncle's church for a while, and that's really when the commandments began to come into my heart. I had a dream. 2 Sundays I went and took a nap, but the first one is the Lord took in the dream. He took me in the church and showed me the blessings that we could have. But he took me to the store. There was a storehouse behind the church, and he took me to the storehouse, and he showed me the commandments. And he said to me, "They have removed my commandments." And I looked at the commandments. They were crude. They were rough. They were, to decorate the church. They weren't attractive to this world. But that's kind of. The next Sunday the first Sunday I had the dream. I saw little children in a hammock and a cradle or something, and it was in the tree. It was a very peaceful setting, but the children were little, and it was just nice. But then the next Sunday I fell asleep, and the Lord began to show me the curses of not keeping his commandments. And I went by the tree once again and saw the children, but they had grown, and one by one the children began to fall away. And from that point on, it just seemed like God put in my heart to keep his commandments. There's blessings in his commandments.
How old were you?
I was young. I mean, I was probably 35, or I was getting close to 40. This is right before the Lord took us to where we was to get the Indians. So after we left, my uncle's church was a great church, and they did ministries. The men did Monday night ministries on the street. We had nursing home services and stuff like that too. But we did a lot. We functioned a lot of ministries, and I helped a lot of street people during that time. I was maintenance. I could get people on jobs with my apartment complex and maintenance. So I would get people on in opportunities that was from the street, and so we took our life and tried to minister people. And on the street, you run into a lot of people. We ran into white supremacist, skinhead, different people, all kinds of people. We had Mexican people come in, but the Lord blessed so mightily in the street services we had.
I feel like this is one of the spiritual gifts. I think that I can't remember which one, but you're caring for the least among us, and you're helping them in pragmatic ways. I would like to talk more about that, but most of your story is about that, actually. But can we zoom in for 1 second on this? Was this a waking vision that you had when you saw when he said, they've removed my law or something? What was this like?
God was showing me he wants to bless his people, but if we're not doing his commandment, there's blessings to me. And I feel like I believe this is a movement we're in, and I'm thankful for your, what you are doing with, bringing different groups together and showing what God has done. But to me, we need to go a little further and have this outreach, compassion. We don't want to come from a ministering church and just be the truth. We want to have the spirit and the truth. We want to have compassion. If you have not charity, so we want to have the burden, the compassion, and if it's just like when I had people in the church, I did ministries, outreach ministries, usually outside of the church, but the bus ministries I did within the church. But if I could get somebody to grab hold and help me a little bit, they would understand. I mean, you might be so tired of doing bus, you've knocked on doors, picked up the kids, and you're wore out at the end of the day, which it takes a team. And I have been, in my life, have been more the working, knocking the doors, shaking the hedges, and bringing people in. So, and I believe that's why what my upbringing is, why God called us. The little church that was in a rough part of town, in a factories, some factories had been shut down and was deserted in some of this area. It was a rough place, but the church had been there for years and years. We had went to a church that my wife grew up in, and then I just started receiving a heavy burden to leave the church, and I didn't know why. So I kind of put a fleece out to the Lord. If the preacher preaches this 3 times, then Lord, I'll leave. And then, which we're a Pentecostal church. And the 3rd time the Lord spoke through interpretation and said, I have called you 3 times.
Now, a quick note from our sponsor, The Life Network. We are currently running a Kickstarter for The Life Network, which is Netflix for Torah, basically. Torah people. And if you're interested in something like that, if you're interested in seeing more shows produced by people that believe the same way you do and content that aligns with your values, then go to watchthelife.com and check it out. Does it matter what he was preaching? Like, what was it that he was preaching, or it's not relevant?
Well, what was bothering me mostly, and I think we need to look at this even in our Hebraic the Hebraic movement, is he was, even though I didn't mind what he was preaching, but he was knocking other churches. And that began to bother me. And even in our movement, when we began to tear down, some things is hurting our movement to go forward because we want to score a point on, our video but some things we could leave alone and not tear down a brother. There's so many brothers I love that they don't even, some of the brothers I love don't always agree with what I think and feel. I get ideals. Sometimes my ideals might be crazy or silly or might not be right. I've seen brothers that proclaim one thing and later on they'll kind of recant and say, the Lord showed me different than what I was, so hard on, or so, you had to be my way or no way. But there's such a need that we move further. And if we don't, so what was hitting me so hard is the church, to tear down a church just because they believe this, that bothered me real bad. But the first time he did it, the second time he did it, and the 3rd time he did it, then the Lord spoke. And that was, I left that very night after a person gave a message in tongues and interpreted, and it said, I have called you 3 times. And the only one I told the Lord, the only one that knew I said that was the Lord. And it was to me, and that's when we headed to the Hell Pentecostal Church. And it was across from a factory. But I believe God was putting me there at the Hell Pentecostal Church because, God knows. And those people probably would have shook their hand, which I took a lot of the Indian men to churches that they didn't shake their hand. But I believe God knew that I would walk down the street with those guys and see what their needs were. When we got to the church, we weren't there probably 2 weeks or so when we saw the first Indians that came over to the church. And after that, I think in ministry, we need to make sure somebody don't walk in our doors or in our path that needs help and we don't mention it. If you heard that story on NPR, there was one part I talked about, the Lord gives us all a corner of a field and we got to, you don't have to save the whole bunch, but whatever person comes in your way, God is calling you to do something for them. And so I took the time. Those people came over. There was about 5 Indian men came over, and they came over Sunday morning. We was going to have a dinner Sunday night, so we asked them to come back that night. And that evening at the dinner... Before
you go on, I know many people won't have heard that This American Life episode, and so can you give, now that we're at this point in the story, they might be like, what is he talking about? Indians? And does he mean American Indians? Does he mean like Native Americans or India Indians? Can you tell us a little, like catch us up with what was happening with John Pickle and that sort of thing, or are you getting there?
No, I will. Okay. Now, what was happening, which we didn't know it till they came over, and the 5 that came over, I began to talk to them, and their English was semi-broken. They wasn't good English. So, but I figured they would be making big money for some company to bring someone all the way from India, because these were skilled people. He was an electrical engineer, and these are people that are just super skilled. So I thought, man, they must be paying you guys a lot of money to come all the way over from India. And then as I began to question him, they told me they were being paid $2 an hour. I thought, man, did I hear that right? So anyway.
When was this? What year time was this roughly?
Well, it has been quite a while. It was back after 9/11. It was back, quite a while. So it was, and so American people were, anybody that had a Eastern look, Arab look, there was a lot of prejudice in the area. We had in our community, somebody hung a bin Laden from a rope from a tree, and so there was a lot of, in fact, as we move into the story, we had to take them really out of the Tulsa area, because there is a little bit of prejudice in the Tulsa area toward during that time, but they were. John Pickle was he was a wealthy man and a rich man, but he was competing with, and if you look up on NPR, it will say competition. You can put John Pickle on NPR, This American Life, and
you tell us though. You were about to tell us. Tell us. Give us a little recap of that, if you will.
Mr. Pickle could not compete with other companies. With the amount of money, what he had to pay his workers with other countries, because other countries had cheaper labor. So he made pretense to the government that he was bringing people here to train them to weld, to teach them these things. So he brought these people. He went to India, picked the best welders, fitters, and skilled laborers that he could find. I mean, he went over there and picked the best people that. Underwater welders, very skilled people were brought here, but they were promised that they could bring their family, that they would have apartment complex, they live in good housing, and bring their family. And generally all these people, I've worked with other trafficking situations, but they're always promised, all these things, we'll give you, you'll become citizen, we'll give you all these things, and they generally have to pay $20,000, $15,000. And in India, that's a lot of money. And generally they put up their houses, they sell their wife's gold, because marriage, they have gold, they invest in, but everything they have to sell. And then the loan, the people they get the loan for, because they can get loans because they have visas to come to America. So they show their visas, and this is, this happens so much in the trafficking part in the United States. It's been a big thing. So if a person goes there, they become pretty wealthy just by bringing people here. So anyway, they brought them here, and when they got here, there's no apartment complexes, there's no green cards, there's no, all the promises are not true. They're locked in a factory, and security guards. And Mr. Pickle was a pretty rich man and involved in the community, like race cars. He was well known, and he was able to use the sheriff department to kind of put a fear into the people. They'd make their tours around the property, and if the people would complain about their food, and he got marked down food like rotten fruit or he fed the people. He probably could have got away with this if he would have fed the people right. But he would ration milk, and you got Hindu people, Muslim people, and you had a big group of Catholic people. And so if like the Hindus, they begin to have to eat meat just for strength, because he wouldn't give them milk, and vegetarians depend a lot on the milk, for their strength and stuff. So with the rationing food, it began to be difficult, and what they also did in the factory was, here you're a skilled laborer, and you're having to do the installation on, you're having to on the piping, or he'll make you a janitor where someone that's got high skill. Now they let all the American people go and are using, if you can pay someone $2 an hour to clean toilets instead of, $15, $10, and the welders generally make $15, $16, $17 an hour, a basic welder, and not the ones that are so good. But he began to let people go that were American workers, because $2, you could get 8 good welders for $16 instead of paying one man $16. So that's the direction they were going. They brought them here in deception. And so when they told me they was making $2 an hour, it was kind of shocking to me. I had some Indian friends. I worked at the hospital, and I did work for them. So some of those guys, we were really close to Christmas, and they did have a holiday, and they snuck out, and I took them to the Indian. We went to the Indian friends. I had their house, and they told them all this story and told them the situation, and they was able to communicate to me more what was happening in the factory.
Okay, question here. I want to make sure that everybody's following this. So this guy, John Pickle, owns a factory. What do they produce?
It was pressure vessels and stuff for oil refineries, big pipes. They had pipe benders, so a lot of their equipment would go out of the country.
Okay.
And so it was in the oil field is what it was. So, and he was putting everybody else in town out of business because nobody could compete against him now, because he had the Chinese labor, but India labor, right here in America, instead of having to go over there and do it.
So he conned all these guys from India by promising them lies, brought them all over, and then what did he do? Why didn't they all just leave?
Well, the one big reason is because the debt they made in India. So they can't return. People's having loan sharks go to their house and terrorize the family if we don't get some money paid on this loan. So they put even though their servitude wasn't to Mr. Pickle necessarily, but it was the servitude they made in India. So their life became very difficult. And that when they came to the church, they were frantic. And so I had a partner in the church, and we was remodeling houses. And so we had a couple houses right there close to the factory. We had bought like for $13,000, fixing up to either sell or rent. And so I had a vacant one. But when they came and told me, it wasn't just that the difficult was working there and the eating and the circumstances, but if you complained, they would put you on an airplane and send you back to India. So they were going to be sent home without being able to pay back their debts, and they had to work to pay back their debts. And so when they came to me, they was telling me the situation. So the first group that came to me, I told them about the house. I took them there. I put a key under the mat. I said, if y'all ever need to leave, you can go there, And so five of them decided to leave the factory. And so it's a rough old factory. It's, there's a train that goes through to bring the metal or to take out metal or to haul different equipment. So lots of times there was a train sitting there, but there was a fence. And I know the first group that wanted to leave, I told them, we agreed at a time to pick them up, and I drove and I didn't know if I was doing right or wrong, if I'm breaking the laws or where I was going with it, So, but after I saw their need, I wanted to help them. But so the ones that came to the church, some of them were Christian. And I remember when I pulled up with my van and they're sneaking luggage, all their stuff out. A Hindu guy's helping them, and he sits in my van while they're bringing their luggage and stuff. And he says, "I'm a Hindu. Will you help me?" And your heart breaks because that's what we're called to help everybody. That's what Christianity should be or is, and so we helped those five people leave. They was afraid they're going to be deported the next day. Some of them had complained about the food situation and everything.
So if he, just further to paint the picture, sorry to keep interrupting, but if they said they were unsatisfied with the conditions, then he would immediately send them back, and then they would have all this mountain of debt, and who knows what would happen. And the food situation you mentioned, he's buying rotten, old, expired food, and he's also, I heard, he's underfeeding the men, right? I didn't they say they had to split an egg for breakfast?
Right, it was. When we did go to court on the case in Tulsa, the guy that brought the food, they asked him in court hearing, how much the food you brought monthly, how many people would it feed? And he said, about 25, and so here you got 52 men sharing a portion that would feed 25 people. And so, it was a difficult time on their food situation, and definitely being from India, you're kind of used to spices. So all the food they did eat, you open up a can of just green beans or something without seasoning. Even the food they received was difficult for them because there was no flavor, no, nothing, substantially good. You couldn't look forward to dinner time. It was what they felt like feeding you. They didn't make it accommodating for what they were used to, for sure. So, and the amount of food they needed.
It sounds horrible.
It was.
It sounds horrible. And so you met these guys at church, 5 of them, and you decided, all right, I'm going to help them. So you snuck those 5 out. Okay, then what happened?
So we did sneak the 5 out. So they moved into the little house that we've got not too far from there, and about maybe half a mile from the factory. And so the next day, because they have no documentation, so the next day I go to the factory and I walk in the door and I ask for these 5 men's passports and their documentation, their IDs. They have nothing on them, no documentation. So I asked them for their ID, and Joe Rebel was the vice president. So Mr. Pickle is out, and I don't know what's happening at the time, but they have the sheriff department and a van, and they're loading up some other people to take to the airport. So, and they're using the sheriff for to follow them as they take the van and to make sure they get on the planes to India. So this is happening, and Mr. Pickle, his blood pressure is way up. So while I'm in there with Joe Rebels in his kicked back in his office chair, kind of rocking back and forth, and he's telling me why they're we have to he's telling me kind of the competition thing and why but they're not going to give me their documents. And then Mr. Pickle, while we're talking, comes in, and man, he's about to have he is red, and he's mad because I'm the Christian from the church next door that's helping these guys, and so it did not go real well, and he didn't return the documents. So after I left there, I didn't know if what I was doing was legal, illegal, if I'd end up in jail. So I left the factory, and we went to an immigration place, and I had nowhere. But we talked to the lady and told them what was, they sent their assistant, their aide out to talk to us, and listen to what we were talking about. And it just so happened I went to the same immigration office that Mr. Pickle had used. But this, if I'd got the wrong person, but this lady listened to the story, and she said I would go to the media, and so after we left there, I did go look for a lawyer. I didn't know what to do. So my brother had gotten a divorce years back, and his lawyer that he used, and he got his kids, his wife had kind of ran off to California and stuff, but he had his kids and stuff. So I went to him, and he was willing to help us. So it just seemed like, God put me there, and God put certain people in certain places to help these people. So we we began to.
So this was like a divorce lawyer, and he is the
He
okay.
took the Indian case. He took the Indian case, and then we end up getting another lawyer too in the process. Which Catholic Charities, there was a Joe McDoulet, and he was our immigration lawyer. And we found him through the Catholic Charities. But as I began to seek for help, the Lord just blessed, and we weren't rejected anywhere we went. We went to I called. There was a Rebecca on Channel 2 News. She the news stations heard my story, and so Rebecca, she was on Channel 2 News, and she brought the fire department. I mean, she made movement to check these things out. So she brings the fire inspector out. She takes this. She was our great hero, to begin with, and so she began to expose it on. We've already got lawyers going on, but I've only got 5 people at that one time. And which, the phones inside, they was able to use the pay phones and stuff there, but they were all bugged. They listened to everything they said. So I guess the rest of the 50 or 40 some Indians conversed all among themselves, and they decided they wanted to leave too. So I mean, we 5 was easy to get out, but now we've got 49 to get out, and it was during the winter time, and it's snowing outside, and they call us and they say, and so we round up all the vans that we can get. My family and that Indian family we had went and talked to, they brought their vehicles, and the vice president Joe Rebel, he was at the gate while they listened to the phone, so they knew we were coming. So he's at the gate ready to shut the gate, but we get in the gate. Well, before I came in there, one of the news stations called me, and they wanted to go in with me, and really we needed the news to keep us protected. And so they came in with their cameras, but they rode in on my van, and later one of their trucks came in and they rode back out with that. But they rode in with my van. It was Lori Fulbright with Channel 6 or 8, I can't remember what station. But they rode in, and we got, as we came in, the sirens began to sound in the building. It's like a jailbreak. I mean, a lot of adrenaline going on because, I don't know if I'm going to be arrested or what. I don't know what's going to happen because, but we began to load up the vans, and everybody jumped in the vans. We loaded, and 52 men exited. We made our exodus, I guess, out of the facility. So we had 52 men to food, housing, all that thing. I was the India community with the motels. They offered us motels, so the first couple nights we were in motels. The guys were, but it was so difficult after we escaped the factory and the news, and now we've got a court case going. We was big news. We was on Tom Brokart, made his. There's videos, and he made a movie, so we made national news too when we was doing this. But me and my wife had a house out in the country, 4,500 square feet, and then we had another little house next to it, and so we couldn't keep making the rounds, feeding 10 at this hotel, 10 at this hotel. So we moved out of the house into a smaller house, and we moved all those men into it was out in the country, so it was good. So we moved them all out in the country, and we began our work to get to find the remedy for their situation. And so the Department of Labor got involved. The court case was amazing. How when the Department of Labor came in, they rushed right in and got all documents. So the Pickle Company was trying to hide all the documents, but we were fortunate they got everything that we needed for the court cases. And so for the next year, after they moved into my house, we moved out. And it was a trying time. The little house we lived in, because the Pickle Company, they would kind of stalk us. And it was the John Pickle Company and the Port City Steel. And Port City, it was all in one factory. But the men that worked for the son-in-law had his, side of the factory, and John Pickle had his. So, but the Port City, their guys would come and sit in front of our house. I had a big van, 15-passenger van, and after they're sitting out there all night, I couldn't let my girls go outside and play. We had to just come and leave and not, because we were kind of being stalked. And so, and then beer bottles through the back of the window of the van, the night. Those guys are sitting out there. So I don't know if they did it, but, it's a good neighborhood. So we just presumed that they threw the beer bottles in the back of our window. So the next year, go ahead.
Where were the police during all of this?
Well, like I told you earlier, the sheriff department came in when they was, and I didn't finish. See, I'll get off track sometimes, but when the sheriff would escort, it was like 2 times the sheriff escorted like 3 Sheriff Bass, I forget the other few sheriffs that were involved, but they would take them to the airport. And so the sheriff did take, so we didn't have the support from the sheriff or the police, and because they had ties with Mr. Pickle, whether it was friendship or what. And most of the trafficking cases I have dealt with involve the sheriff department. And so when they put those guys, that day I was in Joe Rebel's office, and Mr. Pickle, he was just red, looked like he's about to have a heart attack. But what he was busy doing was loading up the van and shipping these other guys off. Besides the 5 people I took out, that probably would have been shipped off the next day too. So they took them to the airport, and they were going to reboard in Atlanta. So when they was in the air, we contacted Atlanta airport and told them that these guys were being forced out, that they still had legal status, but they were being forced out of the country against their will. So Atlanta airport got involved, and they took those guys off the airplane, and those guys came back. So we had those guys plus the other 5. So we had like 10 guys living in that little house for a little while. Then the whole batch decides to come out, because all the promises. And there was a lot of abuses. They were locked in their dormitories. They were threatened, and Mr. Pickle also came from Mississippi, and his family did sharecropping. They graduated from slavery to sharecropping and they had a very like the darkest Indians would get to be the ones that cleaned the toilet and do the labors like that, and they had to repair the septic tank. So they were the ones that were down in the hole digging the sewer out to make it work, because you got 52 guys and the sewer won't function properly for that many people. And
so they were choosing by skin color the guys that had to do the dirty jobs?
Yes, they were. And even their attitude toward the guys, if they came up to ask permission for something, they'd be smoking their cigar and they'd blow smoke in their face. They enjoyed making the people crawl kind of at their feet. The power, I imagine the power and the authority was a kind of a surge to them, a kind of a so yeah, it was a really sad situation. A lot of sad stories. Yeah, so I mean, even they've got stories to tell where they were physically, they would come at them physically even and threatening, So it was a pretty sad time, and they had a security guard, armed guard in there to watch them and everything. But after we got them out, and it took us. They was going to live in our house for a year. We had good times. I had a big yard, pecan grove, a very pleasant place to be. So they played volleyball. We was a little ways from a little school with a soccer place, and India has their soccer, and so we made their life pretty good there. And I had some church friends that would take the guys to the library, and they love the people that. Not everybody's going to grab hold and help, and usually those that do grab hold and help are going to have critics. If you're going to do something, you're going to get critics. And so it wasn't always. We wasn't always a hero with some people. So, but the Lord helped us. He blessed us. We had church services. We I took a big group to Colorado. We went up to Colorado and stayed in some cabins up there. We went up to Ouray and Silverton. We camped at Cimarron. It's a beautiful place. I went up there all my life as a kid. My family were deer hunters, and we went to Colorado every year. So that's kind of. But we took those, and they loved it. They had a good time, and which we had hard times financially. We had hard times. We had people that was taking up money for support. We had one doctor that was giving us like $1,000 a month because we have high water bills and electric and food situation. We went to Catholic Charities, and they provide us a lawyer, Joe McDoulet. Kent Felty was the lawyer that was my brother's, and Joe McDoulet, we began to write the stories and file for a T visa, trafficking visa is what we did, which, these families are still suffering at home. They're not getting any money from the guy, the support for their families. And
because the men can't work during this period because they legally have no documentation?
Working documents. No. So for 1 year, they could not work.
This would be so difficult as a man.
Yeah. Right. It was a hard time. Your wife, some of the guys just got married, and here their wife is. And there was real sad times. There was hard times. And there were sad times too. Some of them was losing their family members. We had mothers pass away, different things. So even though the house was nice and we made a good time and supported them while we tried to get their status. And so we that's where we began to do the T visas. And we got temporary work permits after, I don't know if it was 8 months, 9 months, 10 months. We finally got temporary work permits. So we took them. I took them. First, we went down to Florida. We called around, tried to find jobs. So we went to Florida, and we drive down there in my van with the broke-out window in the back. And we're looking for jobs, and we don't have nowhere to sleep. We ain't got money to pay for motels. We try to sleep on a beach, and we get the police come and run us off, and then we pull into we get called on by police twice. So we parked in a motel parking lot, sleeping in the van, and they call the police on us. We're sleeping, so we don't know that the police are coming. So here's a group of police come in this van that's got a busted out window, and they're talking to one of the Indian guys. You got knives and guns? And yeah, we got knives and guns. I mean, it was a crazy time. But we did. We went on to Mississippi and Louisiana. Some of the guys had some friends that were brought to Louisiana also. So we went to Mississippi, Louisiana, and we were successful in getting them jobs there because they're welders and fitters. You have shipyards. You have offshore drilling. So there was a guy named, trying to think what his name is. We had one guy that began to, Keith Vestgard is what his name was. And he began to help us get jobs with the guys. He was a recruiting agent. So guys are going to work for McDermott, for shipyards. So we got almost everybody a job. But we had to get them cars, and I'm not a good teacher for driving, but we had some exciting times driving, and it was a hard time, but we were successful. We got their driver's license there in Amelia, Louisiana, and we got everybody jobs. And then during that time, we didn't have the T visa. We had temporary work permits, and so there was another group of men that had been trafficked. There has been trafficking similar to this since 1977, the Avondale Shipyard, North American Shipyard, Quality Shipyard, and the last group that was brought was trying to think. It's in Pascagoula, Mississippi, a signal shipyard, and so all these guys recruit, and most of this comes through Mississippi a lot. So there was a sheriff, Michael Paul. And Michael Paul was the first one to begin to bring these people in 1977. So, and he had and he was in the sheriff department, but his side job was becoming a recruiter agent. And so in 1977, he brought 300 men. And, he charges the fees in India, so he becomes, he's already getting rich, just the fees that he brings them on. And then he paid them. He did pay them better than Mr. Pickle paid his guys. He paid them $8 an hour. And on that deal, there was two guys I interviewed with that came with the 1977 guy. Actually, they had came with the 1977 guys, and they were deported back to India. What happened, it was like 4th of July, like we're at right now, and I don't know if the guys had made trouble, if they'd been drinking. I don't know what had called Michael Paul to get mad at him, but Michael Paul and all these people have, big old muscle guys, and they have people that work for them. And so one of Michael Paul's guys goes to the housing that they were staying in, and he starts beating up Joshi and Sonny, or two guys. And there was a third guy in the apartment, and he was scared. So he goes and calls the police, which, the police department is separate than the sheriff department. So the police come, and they're going to make charges against the guy that's beating up the two Indian guys. And so it becomes a court case because the policeman files, charges against the guy that was doing it. So up to the time the court appearance was to happen, and the day before, as they got off at work at 3 or 4 o'clock, a sheriff car shows up, and they handcuff the two guys that are going to be in the court testifying what happened. So he handcuffs them, and then he blindfolds them, and then he takes them out to the swamps and alligators and everything. I guess he didn't want them to see where they were being taken. And so they're handcuffed, laying, on their knees at the swamp, and they got guns held to their head. And they beg for their life. They say, please, we'll go back to India. Just send us back to India. So, and that's what they did. They didn't, they lived to tell about it. I don't know if he ever did that to anybody else or not, but the sheriff, he took them and sent them out the airport that night. And so, and those two guys eventually came back, in 2001 on the John Pickle, so this was their second go round.
Oh man, they got the bad hit draw twice in a row.
You'd think they learned just that one, but maybe, I guess, Mr. Pickle seemed like a nice guy when he came to, he promised them all these things. So he personally goes to India.
Pickle is a very friendly last name. You would think that you could trust the guy.
And his appearance, he's a bigger, older guy. He's got a nice smile. You do. And he was friendly to them. And so they thought they could trust him, because he promised them, you're going to live in a nice apartment complex. You're going to have a nice house. You get to bring your family, and that's usually the promise that's given in all these trafficking cases. So, which the trafficking situations continue. Michael Paul had agents that worked for him. He had Don Rhodes and Mike Bennett worked. He had an office separate. He still worked the sheriff department, and so it's kind of like Michael Paul didn't always bring people through his name, So there was other people that. Like the Don Rhodes, Mike Bennett, and there was a Chad Chandler that Chad Chandler's the one that I got more involved in. But Chad Chandler, he brought people here. He represented that he was bringing them to the steel. He built steel buildings or erected them, and he used it a lot of Mexicans. But he went and got 300 guys from India, and that's 20,000 a head. So he's going to be a pretty wealthy man. I don't know if he shared. I know Michael Paul would meet with him, and one man that would be with Michael Paul and Chad Chandler. Chad Chandler told, his name was Srinu, one of the Indian guys, and he told Srinu that Michael Paul was a dangerous man, and but so there's several groups. They're bringing 300 men at a time. The last group was Signal Shipyard, and they brought 600 men. But like North American Shipyard. That North American Shipyard was after the 1977, and it was probably, I'm not sure what date, which I was trying. Once we had filed T visas for the Tulsa guys, we was trying to help these other guys with T visas also. So Chad Chandler, while we was down getting jobs for the other for our Tulsa guys, Chad Chandler had some guys. One of our Tulsa guys knew a person that was being held in the Pines Motel in Baton Rouge. It was an area. The motel was. I went there. The motel was really rough. Rats. I mean, nasty bugs. Most of the motels in that area were boarded up. It was a pretty dark part of town. It was on Airline Boulevard. So I went and just visited. Chad Chandler, a friend of Michael Paul's, and I'm sure he got his cut from Chad Chandler, Michael Paul did, because they'd meet together. And so, because Michael Paul knows how to go to India and get all these people. And so, he would arrange for other groups to get people over there. And so I met with the people at the Pines Motel. When they bring 300 people, they can put 100 people to work or 50 people to work. So you bring people that's never going to work, and you're not caring if they work. You're just going to dump them on the street or ship them back. And sometimes even now, Chad Chandler, he was the last group that brought the last group, not the last, but he was before the Signal. You can look up and hear the stories of Signal. It was, not that many years ago. But Chad Chandler is where I was trying to help those guys. And he had big muscle guys watching the compound or the motel to keep, anybody from leaving or keep track of the guys.
How did you get involved with Chad Chandler? I may have missed that. Or where's the connection?
Well, one of the Tulsa guys had a friend that had been brought with Chandler. Falcon Steel is the name of the company. Falcon Steel. So he knew his situation. He was being held at the Pines Motel. They've been here months. They have no money, and they're not even getting money for food. They're having to go, dig through trash cans to get food. They're in a desperate situation. So I go there, and so now I'm going to help these guys. And so, they've got security guys at the gate, and the wife was kind of held prisoner too, in a way, because her husband, he kept a tracer on her car. He would know everywhere she went, their phone calls. He didn't trust his wife, and which probably was a good reason he didn't, because she wasn't. She couldn't leave him. She was in an abusive situation. She had one child before they married, and he'd be mean to her child. He had a couple kids with her, but I forget how we got phone numbers, or her sister they got my number, and they began to call me and tell me what was happening. And so the wife knew what was happening. She would communicate to her sister. They would call us, and all these guys that were at the motel were going to be deported. So they're scared. One of the guys would actually go in Chad Chandler's shop, and the wife became friends with him. They would talk, and she was a good lady. And so I don't know if they exchanged phone numbers or how they knew the phone number, but if anything was happening, she would let them know. So I was living in Amelia, where all the Tulsa guys were getting jobs. And so I get a phone call about 9 or 10, and they tell me they're going to deport them the next morning. His wife called, and they were going to have all those guys deported. And so they're frantic. They haven't even got to work since they've been here, and they don't have money to pay back their debt. So, I hadn't slept all day. At midnight, I'm going over there to get those people out. They've got the entrance to the motel guarded. So we began to send. I went and rented one motel room to bring them and bring their stuff, and we began to send taxis in to get all the men that were in there. So we're doing this all night long, and about 7 o'clock the next morning, Chad Chandler shows up, and he's a gunman. He's got a gun. He's got his big Suburban, and So he begins to chase us down. I got about 5, 6, 7, 8 of the Indians in my vehicle, and some of them are staying in the motel. So I'm being chased, and so I see a policeman motorcycle guy, giving somebody a ticket. I pull over to the policeman, and he disappears. So then he begins to chase me. I go to the sheriff department.
What do you mean the policeman disappeared?
No, Chad Chandler does. He quits chasing me.
Okay, got it. Sorry,
So,
continue.
Yeah, so he's gone. He disappears. So then I'm talking to my wife on the phone while he's chasing me, and he, but anyway, he's chasing me, and so then I go to the sheriff department. Now he's left me for it. So I pull into the sheriff department to report this horrible thing, and then Chad Chandler shows up, and I'm being booked for a crime. So he said I ran over him, and so now I haven't slept all day yesterday, all night.
Did you run over him?
No. So I was, but they put me in jail. I got no phone call. I was in the sheriff department like from 7, and he took his Indians back, went to the motel. So all of them went back to the Pines Motel, and I'm going to jail. So I was in there quite a while, and it was abusive. I mean, here I am, and I'm heavy. I'm not skinny, but I mean, they're abusive words, and it was horrible in the sheriff department. They were totally enjoying trying to humiliate me and make it a not a happy moment. They impounded my van. They took it in, and I had been talking to my wife while I was being chased, but then no contact after that. My phone's, I have no phone, and so she doesn't know where I'm at, doesn't know what happened.
How long were you in there?
Well, from 7:00 that morning till they booked me, took me to prison, and I had my mug shot and all that, and so I don't know. I mean, the Indians that were with me that went into the sheriff department, they knew I was arrested, but I didn't know anybody else did. So I'm in there, and I don't get no phone calls or anything. So I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm sitting there in the jail. I'm talking to the Lord. I'm saying, Lord, I'm not ever going to help anybody again. But I'm in there, and one of the policemen came to me and finally, because I hadn't received no phone calls, couldn't tell anybody what happened or, where I was. I never dreamed of getting arrested. I was going to report the situation and that I was being chased and everything. And so two of the men from Tulsa, I don't know how they raked up the money. They paid my bill, and at midnight, at straight up midnight, they came and let me out. And I didn't know how I got out, who knew or what. So they just said, Mr. Massey, you're free to go. So somehow they got my bail together. I think they called Camp Filthy in Tulsa, and I don't know if he arranged a bail bond or what. It was JP and Hamunchu, and Raju's a guy that was a Falcon guy. So those three guys rode together and came to the St. Mary's Parish prison, and I got out. And I think it was my wife drove down I called her. She drove down from Tulsa. She wasn't real happy, but she drove down to Tulsa, and I just made a lot of trouble for us. And so we went to the first lawyer there in Louisiana, and she looked at all my charges, and she told me that I was looking at 10 years in prison. And so Louisiana had passed the law just recently during that time. If it was a severe situation like that, the minimum was 10 years. So I was looking at prison time, and I went back home, and when they finally one day in Tulsa, when we was in our house, a big old sheriff came and served me a subpoena to come back we had to go to a judge to even let me go home from Louisiana when I was released. I had to go get, after I was bonded out, I had to go get permission to leave the state of Louisiana before I'd be tried, I was fortunate Brent Burley, he was a good guy. He was a Christian. He's from a Christian family. I think, he'd gotten hurt, but in church at one time. He wasn't going to church at the time, but him and his wife were wonderful people. And he took my case in Louisiana. And he wasn't well liked by the sheriff department. Before I came, him and a group of people had sued the sheriff. Somebody they were campaigning for, sheriff. The sheriff that was in position, I don't know how they found out, but the sheriff was using the FBI intelligence to spy on his opponent or to get documentation against his opponent. So Brent Burley took him to court against that. So they don't like Brent Burley already, because he's already made trouble for them. So, but Brent Burley took my case, and I don't know, it was about a 2-year period before it was all dissolved. But I was looking at 10 years, and they was going to negotiate a plea bargain, So they were offering me 3 years, and there wouldn't be a trial. So I would have been in Louisiana 3 years in prison, and I guess a felon or whatever I would have been. So, but I didn't take the plea bargain, and I was blessed because Chad Chandler's wife. We had evidence of Chad Chandler trafficking, had all the evidence of that, what was going on. So finally my case was dismissed. But it didn't look like it at first. It looked like I was going to be in prison. So
for years, you were having that possibility hanging over your head.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you were spending money, I assume, on the fees, the lawyer fees.
Kent Felty was getting some funds and stuff, so they were paying for a lot of my fees. It wasn't really coming out of my pocket, which I wasn't working either. I left my business, and now, don't have good ends, financial support to make it necessarily. But the Lord blessed, and we made it. You had turned full-time Good Samaritan. Yeah, and it took a big part of our life, but the Lord did bless. He did bless, and which the Chad Chandler deal, his wife was supportive of us, and probably had she not gave her testimony, Chad Chandler he works with horses, and he got kicked by a horse like the night before, but when he said I ran over him, he comes in the police office. They called him, I guess. They know him, Michael Paul's in the sheriff department, but that's what he shows is his leg is, but his wife tells that, gives testimony that he was kicked by a horse, that I didn't run over him. And anyway.
Were you not able to counter sue or whatever this guy? Wasn't there any recourse where you could squeeze a little juice out of the guy?
Well, but I didn't have money to keep that going. I was just glad not to be going to prison. So, and the Lord blessed there. And I continued with them, and which we're still helping the Tulsa guys with jobs, with cars, with housing, and actually we hadn't yet received the T visa. At one point, Joe McDoulett from the Catholic Charities, he was from Oklahoma City, and so our first response on our T visas was intent to deny, and so it's really sad. We got work permits for a temporary working, but now it was fixing to be all over with the intent to deny. But he made his appeal, and the Lord blessed, and we got T visas. And when you get T visas, you do get to bring your families. And so the Pickle situation was coming out real good, which we had filed for the Chad Chandler's group, and I was also filing because the Avondale and the North American guy, one North American guy was telling me his story. He had escaped. The North American, if they tried to escape, they'd hunt them down with helicopters or whatever. There was people, if they could escape to the road, there was a Vietnamese or a Pastor Kim. He was helping a lot of people, kind of like I was. He was helping them if they could get out, and he'd pick them up on the road, and he'd try to make their situation good. But Now, like when Michael Paul, with the North American situation, it's after the Avondale. And so what Michael Paul would do is he would bring a group of people, and he's got to keep a rotation going because he's bringing 300. So he keeps this going. So he would bring people, but he would have to deport people to make room for the next group. So he had, there at North American, the guys that were there, some of them that was deported, he had his 30th birthday party at 30th year birthday party at North American Shipyard. The guys, all of them are celebrating, and he announces, this is my 30th birthday, and I'm 30 years old. You guys have made me $30 million, and I'm going to send 30 of you back to India tonight. So the immigration vans show up, the police show up, and see, he's in the sheriff department, so he's paying a lot of his friends. So there's a lot of dirty hands. He even gave money to politicians. So not everybody wants to go against Michael Paul. Everybody's got their hands dirty on all his money he's bringing in. So, he's loading up these 30 people on a bus, going to take them to Texas and send them back to India.
How are you learning all of this information? I'm trying to track all of this. I want to make sure that the audience can also track what's happening. Like, we left the guys in the motel. You had this whole suit, and then we jumped over to this other situation. How are you learning this information, and how does it have to do with you?
Well, because we help the Tulsa guys. There's a lot of people in bad situations. They're looking for help. I've become a real popular guy after our success with the Tulsa guys. So, they're looking for the same success that the Tulsa guys had. And they've got
these
two
are Indian men who had been trafficked, and they're reaching out to you and telling you of all these other situations now.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So,
got it.
So, and all of them's pretty much tied to, even Mr. Pickle's tied to Mississippi, but all of these men are tied semi to Michael Paul, the sheriff.
Okay.
And so...
where is he again? Where's Michael Paul?
Michael Paul, Mississippi and Louisiana. He kind of right there on the border of both. And so he was a sheriff in Mississippi. And when he ran the guys, he ran a kind of a pretty shady deal anyway. Some of his officers that worked for him, ran drugs. And some of them were arrested, got caught running the drugs. And so he kept a pretty shady bunch among his crowd, and which the immigration department assisted him because he's high up in the sheriff department, and so he used immigration and the police department to deport these men when he would need to bring the next group in, So,
and all of this information that you are telling us is coming from the stories of these men, basically.
Right.
These
I'm
different
writing
men.
Affidavits. I'm writing affidavits of these men to file a T visa. So I've got me a trailer, which I'm probably, just like Chad Chandler's wife is being followed, his sister called me and told me I was being followed. And so they probably have a tracking device on my truck like he did his wife's. So I'm not in good safety zone. I don't know why I came out, as good as I did. Now, Brent Burley, he was assistant. He began to assist. Kent Felty came down there and began to do the case in Louisiana and Mississippi. And so we're filing case against Chad Chandler, and Brent Burley is taking my affidavits of the men's story for North American and the different men that were brought there too. So I've got all file cabinets in my trailer, of the stories as we're writing them. And I'm pretty much trying to do what Joe McDoulet, the immigration lawyer from Catholic Charities, was doing. I helped so much. I kind of understood the process. So during that time, the little trailer, I had a padlock. It wasn't a big trailer. But the padlock on the door was busted off, and my files were all stolen, and of the North American ones. Which I was telling you about the North American guy. He was telling me when the police were forcing him in the van, these guys are crying, touching the policeman's leg, saying, "Don't send me back to India." They'd say it's our life. It's our life if you send us back, and so. Which some of them escaped, And the one, there was Bala is the guy's name. When I was doing all this, I was driving my truck, and he even he had gotten a job, bought me new tires for my truck when I was driving back and forth. But he told me about a time after he got out and he was able to get a job, that a policeman, he was going too fast, and he said the policeman stopped him and he recognized him. And he said the policeman started to cry and saying, I helped to deport those guys. I put them on that. And they'd touch my leg and they'd cry, And so he said, if I hadn't already called this in, I wouldn't give you a ticket, But it was a sad situation. It really was. In fact, I even helping these North American different guys. We were filing paper, but it takes a while. It took over a year to get the Tulsa guys a visa, T visa. And so I get a phone call from one of the guys. He's in South Carolina, and he's real depressed. And I said, man, just hang on. I'm sure he couldn't send money home. He's having a situation, and it's an hour later, 2 hours at the most, I get a phone call, and it's from the police department. He had just committed suicide. And so there was a lot of sad situations, because, we don't understand coming from a poor country and here you put your family in India in a bad situation because the loan sharks they're not going to write you off with the credit bureau, So there was a lot of sad situations. So we kept working on it. Now, and I'll tell you, now I don't know who or what, but Brent Burley was the lawyer that got me off of the prison term I was facing, and which he made trouble for the sheriff department. And I'm not saying, but I had called his office I was still getting the stuff on the North American guys, and the day after I called his office, I didn't get to talk to him. He wasn't in the office. I don't know if my phone, because these are sheriff department, and they're using the FBI for other stuff. So I don't know if they heard my phone call. I don't know. But it was, like a couple of days after that I got news that Brent Burley had committed suicide, which it's documented in the documentation. It was a suspicious suicide. And so that kind of ended the forego of our North American guys, filing paperwork and stuff. So
he was actively working on their cases, and that's when that happened.
That's when that happened, and it could have been a real suicide. I don't know, and it probably was, but it was documented as a suspicious suicide. And I don't know who. I mean, there was plenty of people with calls, and. So I don't know.
Okay, so what year are we now? And what's up with the Tulsa guys? They have the T visas, and we're moving on to the next section, or what?
Yeah, and the Falcon guys, we were unsuccessful for their T visas. Kent Felty was helping. He was filing the T visas, but they all got denied.
Which guys are these? These are who?
They're the guys in the Pines Motel. They're that was my next group I was starting to help. And Kent Felty was helping too. He came down to Louisiana. So we're filing paperwork for them. And
so Tulsa guys, they got the T visas, and they now are employed through connections that they had, and you took them all around.
We're filing family visas. Life is good for them. Yeah.
Beautiful. And they all got jobs, and they might still be here with their families now.
They are here, and wonderful families. I mean, we're part of their families here. We go to every housewarming. We go to birthday parties. We go to graduations and stuff. So we became kind of their American family, their American parents. So they made our house and our lives really wonderful.
I'm sure you have a lot of friends. So, okay. And then the Pine Motel or whatever, those guys, sadly, that didn't work out.
Right. So a lot of those guys end up getting deported and sent back home. Some of them stay here, managed to stay here. We had a hard time, even with the John Pickle case, getting the families here because, Bombay sent the people here with John Pickle. So they didn't like the people getting T visas. So they would make all kinds of trouble for the families to come here. So we had hardships, but they finally got here, and these guys are wonderful welders. Now they're inspectors. They've made a good life here
What
in America.
about Michael Paul? What about John Pickle? What about Chandler? Are they all in prison right now, or what?
No, they didn't go to prison. No, they didn't go to prison. Now, Michael Paul has position, and I don't know if the FBI was going big time on our case, even the Falcon Steel case. I would meet with the FBI real regular. Teresa Haltz was her name, and she got involved in a drug case in the high school, and she said, "We're going to pull off your case just temporarily. We'll be back." And they busted some big drug cases there in Louisiana, and her team got big awards. I mean, it was real public. They busted a big drug ring, and it never came back to our case after that. And so and Mike Paul had big aspirations to be. He would tell the Indian men that would be around him that he was going to be the next governor. Which he had the money. He had the millions. And the sheriff department, they always wondered how. I mean, he'd have the big house, the cars. He had his wealth, and you didn't get that wealth working at the sheriff department. So
What's his current status?
I think he's never got in trouble. He got promoted actually once there in the sheriff department. I think he just dirtied too many hands for them to, you had immigration helping him, you had the police department. I think, and politicians. He gave.
So he might still become governor. Who knows?
He could. I think he is on a talk show in Mississippi. I mean, he's a sharp, good-looking guy. He's probably 50-something now, but I mean, he was 30-something when he made his first $30 million. So he's made far more than that because he brought 600 people to Signal Shipyard, and all those guys got TV set. It was just a real profitable, thing. After the Lord blessed all these people. Some sad stories. But then I went back to Oklahoma. From that point, I worked for the state. And I go to work as a maintenance director at Clinton, Oklahoma. And I rent a trailer house, a small one. And the guy that rents it to me, he's helping. After I rent it, I don't know how but he's helping a Indian guy that was trafficked by a sheriff in Clinton, Oklahoma. And so we was able to get his TVs. He called me probably day before yesterday, but he's living in California, got a family now. But the Lord blessed us. They were brought in the hospitality place. The guy had motels, he had restaurants, and so he brought Indian people here, and he might pay on their tips, but he didn't. He charged them everything, and so I was able to help one person. Then after the Indians, he brought people from another some Asian people he brought to work in his restaurant. But the Lord, I'm just saying the Lord. I mean, even that situation, the guy's a Christian. He called me and he was a Christian, but the Lord led me to John Pickle factory, and then so his hand's been on all of this, and I don't know. God blesses who He will bless, and I don't know the purpose, the reason He's done it. In our Hebraic movement, there's different thoughts on the lost brother, the lost tribe, the lost, and sometimes God's got a long plan. He sees further down the road. And so maybe I'm helping a brother that's going to come back into the house. I don't know. So that's what I feel. I went to India. I was taken to I went spent a month in India, and which I visited a lot of things. I went to Kerala, and they've got the synagogue there in Kerala. And
I have a couple questions for you here. Okay. That's a wild story. So are you still involved in doing this, helping people, or are you now, and are you still working in the maintenance place? What are you doing now?
Yeah, I'm still working maintenance. And I'm still involved off and on. We've been able to help different situations, which I have contact with good lawyers. And so some of the lawyers through Catholic Charities in Oklahoma City, there was a lady lawyer that took Joe McDoulett's place, and her husband, they do immigration. So sometimes through the process of the signal guys, if they end up having trouble with their paperwork, I get connections, and some of them have been denied their T visa or citizenship, and so we've been instrumental in helping them. And then I've filed for asylum. I've got one fellow that's on asylum right now. I helped him file, and I've got one of the Falcon guys that kind of fell through the hose that had never filed for the T visa. I look to be filing his T visa. I just need to find a time to go up and see him and get it filled out. So he still don't have anything, and he's been here all this time. And
are factory owners and employers still doing this?
A lot of the H-1B visas, they may still. I'm sure it happens a lot now. Like when I first took the Tulsa guys down, that Keith Vestcard, he put a lot of our guys to work, but he was also working some of Chad Chandler's guys. And so he would get them jobs on a shipyard or something, and which he did get a visit from Chad Chandler, and he did have his life threatened if he didn't quit using his guys, you know. And so Keith, and you could find that in the stories, Keith Vestcard, he can't win for losing, so he decides he gets two Indian brothers down in Browns, Texas, and they file for about 25, 50 Indians in India to bring here, and some of them they were charging $50,000, and from 25 to 50,000 for opportunity to come and work and do, but he's not a sheriff, and he didn't go through Michael Paul, and he got I don't know how much prison time he served. Some of it was house arrest, but the courts did come after him when he did that. But they never have, went after Michael Paul or I guess Chad Chandler or Mike Bennett or Don Rhodes. So they pretty well skipped any any retribute from it or anything.
So can we go back now to your story when you were helping these guys in the Pickle case? How did the church react that you were going to? What did people do? Were they all behind you?
Really, I wasn't. I was definitely. There was people because John Pickle was a known guy. There's people that I was the bad guy, and in fact, we had back before all our talk shows we have now. The main talk show on the radio, he was more of a liberal guy. He wasn't conservative. And on the radio, they leaned to the Pickle side. I wasn't the hero. And even with some of the church people, I wasn't, I wasn't always the hero. I would take these guys to different churches, and there's a lot of prejudice within churches. So I know I was taking them to one church, and a lady came up to me and said, the reason we don't want these guys here is they might get interested in our daughters, or something. So we didn't always get a hand of fellowship as we went, different places. Sometimes we did, but a lot of times we didn't. And so, and there was one brother that told me, when I began to start, he said, "Mark, leave it. Nobody cares," And so I didn't always get my big promotion or support from the church. In fact, which my mother had always been worked around the clock all the time. And my mother's a giving lady. So I would say 50% of our bills was paid by my mother. She supported us.
Did you just have that kind of waking vision at the church? Is that the only time when your eyes were open to, the laws are relevant to us? Or
Well, it became, and it still is. It's really a burden on my heart. And if you've been in just a regular church where you have a burden for the lost or a burden, I'll tell my brother, I've got such a burden for this. And so he said, well, that's, he can just visualize having a burden for the lost. But the burden I have on my heart is, I love the brother, but I love his ways and his commandments. So we need to bring a young people that loves the commandments. We look at Ruth brought into Bethlehem, but she sat at Naomi's side at her feet and heard the wonderful things that God had done, the miracles. And that's what we need to bring to our young people. Our focus, we can have church. I'm going to survive. I'm going to be a Christian, go to church and all that. Even if I don't go, I'm steadfast in the Lord, but we got to bring our children up. Something I was wanting to tell too is, my mother divorced when I was young. I had stepbrother. We was the Brady Bunch, but not as good as the Brady Bunch. I had a sister that was in the occult. We'd have Ouija board and all that stuff before my mom got saved. And it was a pretty dark, she was into witchcraft, and she went out on the street and she was living on the street, and they was having a kind of a, it was my stepsister. So she's got, the devil, she's on drugs. She's the Janis Joplin. Her hair is frizzed out. She is, she's getting in trouble, shoplifting. Her life is just a mess. She almost overdosed twice, but she moved out of the house. She's on the street, and some people came over, and they're having a service outside, by like a mission. And they come over to the park bench. She's got a witchcraft book in her hand, and they say, why don't you come and join us in this service? And she did. And, they're singing, and the devils in her begin to manifest. So they take my sister into the mission instead of out in the chairs and stuff. And then the ladies get with her and say, Kelly, if you'll call on the name of Jesus, he'll set you free. So she says she cried out, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And those demons' voices came out of her that wasn't her own. And she was delivered. It was, they called the house of Nacogdoches. So after she got saved, they took her to a farm, a ranch they had. Some people worked in the gardens. She worked in the house, and they would have Bible time, prayer time, and they had a strict guidance. She had to get up early, but she began to keep her Bible book, and they was going through the Bible, and they would have their closet of prayer. She went into a prayer room, a prayer closet, and the Lord gave her a vision. And when she was in this vision, she saw a tunnel, and in this tunnel there was water flowing through this tunnel. Plenty of water, all kinds of water, but it was nasty water. It was polluted water, but there was people chained in this cave. They were chained to the wall, and they were so thirsty. They were so desperate. And outside the cave, to the side of the cave, was a barrel, and in that barrel was living water. It was splashing up, and she heard the voice of the Lord said, "Who shall give them a drink?" And, she said she felt like a school kid, when the principal asks you, who wants to take this paper to the principal office? Everybody raised their hand. But she says, Lord, I will give them a drink. What we need is living water, pure water. We've got churches every corner, but our water is polluted. Our water is not living water. It's got debris. It's got, and that's to me what our movement is trying to rid us and have living water. We don't want a little bit of, like the Samaritan woman, they had a little bit of Jacob and they had a little bit of the pagan, So when we're giving out our water, and that's what we're doing, but what we need, we're telling the truth. But we don't just want to tell the truth. We want to have this burden. I wish I could share this burden with other people, because you're kind of like Hannah crying at the feet of Eli, saying, "Lord, give me a child. Give me a child." One thing, Jesus said to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he was saying, you put the burdens on men, but you do not even keep the commandments. And he said, honor your father and mother. And they weren't doing that. So to me, we've got a great ministry a great job, and the people that are standing in the gap, making it the hedge to get this thing motivated. It seemed like the Lord, but the devil tries to stop what we're trying to do. But, we like it when we, something I see even in Christianity, if we do not have the joy, when you see people come in, they're going to say, I want what they've got. And so we've got to have a glow about us. We've got to have a smile on our face. And a lot of churches, where they've missed it, is they don't have the joy. Why would a sinner want to come in and have, it's almost like crying in my beer songs. We want to come with the joy. It's not, I'm so burdened. I don't know if I can make it. We want to be full and thankful and just have that zeal, and people look at us and they want to drink of that water. What I want to see is a generation coming up. I feel like we need to take a back seat a little bit to ourselves and begin to reach out to a young people. And I was brought up where the young people were part of the church. We prayed with and once you begin to experience that, and then my son-in-law and daughter, I introduced you to Joe, my son-in-law, but they have just finished up with the church they're with does a lot of outreach ministry, so they go into projects like this last week. They went to Austin, and their team ministered to people, the refugees, and they're not going to be. Who knows how long they'll be here? But here the Afghanistans are letting their children come into a crusade, and the Sudan, and there was other countries too that were there at this project. And here the little children are coming, and the kids of the church. A 9-year-old girl is holding a little Afghan girl or a Afghan child, and they're showing them love. They go to talking with the families, and one mother had been given a car, but the battery doesn't work, so they go buy her a battery, and they become a part and ministering, and there's an open door. Because God's not just wanting to reach us here in America. He's wanting to reach India. He's wanting to reach, and there's never been Iran. If they take a back seat toward the Islamist, and there's an open door, it's not just for us. It's for the Lord said to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And so we've got an opportunity right now, and it's always been there. I've done outreach with the Mexicans, where we taught English classes while they were here. Whether you're for immigration, against it, we have opportunity for the moment. And maybe they will bring back to their people, if they go back to Afghanistan, they'll say, but while I was there, they loved me. And so we've got an opportunity to love people.
You're right. And if you hadn't intervened here with these guys with the Pickle case, and it sounds like many others, then they may have just gone back, been deported, and been like, man, those Christians, none of them helped me. So thank you again, Mark. I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you guys for watching this episode. I hope that it was helpful or beneficial to you in some way. If you'd like to help fund the Life Network, go to watchthelife.com, and that will help us create a whole stable of content that aligns with your values. So go to watchthelife.com and check out the trailer there. It'll walk you through all the shows that we have on the docket and all the ones that maybe we could produce in the future.